Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the last session of day 2 of Virtual Fox Fest. My name is Doug Hennig. I'm a partner with Stonefield Software, and this session is Modernize Your Applications with DBI's ActiveX Controls. For those of you who don't know me, I am the author of the Stonefield Database Toolkit, which is now available via open source, and also Stonefield Query. I've written a number of products that come with VFP, including the member data editor and the anchor editor, and some of the products that were in Sedna, the upsizing wizard. I've written over 100 articles in Fox Talk, Advisor, and Fox Rocks over the years. I am co-author of several books, the latest one being VFPX, Open Source Treasure. As you know, I'm one of the organizers of Southwest Fox and Virtual Fox Fest. I'm one of the co-administrators of VFPX, which, if you haven't checked it out, is an awesome site for open source software for Visual Fox Pro. I was a Microsoft MVP for about 15 years or so, and in 2006, I was awarded the Fox Pro Community Lifetime Achievement Award. What we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be taking a look at DBI's ActiveX Controls. So I'll talk a little bit about DBI and a little bit about their controls. We'll spend most of the time taking a look at several of my favorite controls in their control suite, and then we'll wind up talking about licensing and deployment. A little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions in the stage chat panel, as you've been doing for other presentations. I'm going to stop after each control to address any questions. But as Rick mentioned in the opening session, there is a 20-second delay. So if you think of a question, type it right away, and then Rick will read it out to me when I stop for questions. Also, there's a Q&A session in the sessions area immediately following this presentation. So if you click on sessions, you'll see Q&A with Doug. So that's where you can go and we'll answer any questions there as well. All right. So as you probably know, by today's modern UI standards, most VFPX controls look kind of dated. Of course, the solution to that is ActiveX Controls to replace some of those controls or to add additional functionality. The problem is that most of the ActiveX vendors are no longer in business. They're providing controls for the .NET environment or other platforms, web environment, for example. And there are very few ActiveX vendors left, and of the ones that are left, none of them, except for one, offers VFP support. DBI is a longtime VFP supporter. They actually started off as VFP developers themselves. So although their focus these days is .NET, they also do ActiveX controls that are compatible with VFP, and they have documentation in VFP, and they have samples in VFP for every control. So they are a very strong VFP supporter. They've been a longtime supporter of our conferences. So they're part of the Visual Fox Pro community. They have a product called Studio Controls for COM. It comes in both 32 and 64-bit versions. And this is the ActiveX suite that we're going to be looking at today. It has a total of 88 controls, of which 63 are unique. And the reason why some of the controls that I really like a lot and think you probably will as well, and probably the ones that you'll be most likely to use. Now, before we get into looking at individual controls, one of the things that is a little bit different about the DBI controls is that they are based on indexes rather than on collections. So for example, these two lines of code here at the top, these would be how you would add a node to the Microsoft tree view control. You'd say otree.nodes.add. You'd specify the key for a parent, assuming that you're adding a child node. 4 is a code indicating that this is a child node. And then you specify the key, the text, the image, and so on. That returns a node object. And then you can talk to that node object, setting properties. For example, onode.bold is true to make it bolded. With the DBI controls, they don't really work that way. Instead, you're really working with the tree view control as an object and not with individual node controls. Instead, you'll be referencing indexes of the tree view or the other DBI controls. So for example, again, the tree view version, we don't specify the parent key when we add a node. Instead, you make that parent the selected node. So otree.selected equals the index of the parent node. And then you say otree.add picture node if you want it to be a picture node. There's other methods as well. And you specify the text and the image and so on. That returns an index number, not an object. So if for example, if it's the first node that you add to the tree view, the index will be 1, the second node would be 2, and so on. Then you don't set a property of a node object. Instead, you set a property, an array property of the tree view control. So otree.node font bold, and then specify the index equals true. So it's a little different way of thinking. We're kind of used to working with objects when it comes to not only Fox Pro code, but also ActiveX controls. The DBI controls just use a different paradigm for how you address them. So just a little something to get used to. Now, the index is the position of the item in the case of a tree view, so it could actually change. I could insert a node in between 2 existing ones. So, for example, if I insert a node into position 2, then what was 2 becomes 3, what was 3 becomes 4, and so on. So you don't necessarily want to rely on the index. If you're later on, you want to talk to the tree view control, like when the user clicks on a node, for example, and you want to use that to get the key, or you want to convert from a key into a node number, you probably don't want to use the index. Instead, you can put the key into the node data array if it's a numeric key, or into the node cargo array if it's a character key. So again, looking at the Microsoft tree view control, if you wanted to look up a particular node, if you had the key value, the way you would get an object reference to the node for that key is you'd say otree.nodes C key, that returns the object reference to that particular node. In the case of the DBI control, if you have a numeric key, there's a find data method of the tree view. So you say otree.find data, and you pass it the numeric key value, and it returns the index. Again, it's not returning a node object, but it's going to return the index of the node that matches that key. There isn't a find cargo method, so instead you have to use a little loop. For I equals 0, like a lot of ActiveX controls, it's items are 0 based. So for I equals 0 to the list count -1, if the cargo element at that index number equals your character key, then you have the index and you can exit out of the loop. All right, so now let's talk about individual controls. That's sort of a little bit of generic information about their controls. Let's talk about specific controls. I'm going to talk about ctx tree view first, because this is the control that I think most people use tree view controls in their applications. Very popular control, used for tons of different things. And the ctx tree view control has so many more capabilities than the Microsoft control. For example, it has a built-in image list. So you don't have to load images into an image list and then associate the image list and the tree view. It's just built in, so you just load them right into the tree view. It supports titles and headers. So as you can see in the image over at the right here, number 1, position number or item number 1 is a header for the tree view control. And number 2 would be titles. So you can have titles for the rows. It also supports columns. So that's what I mean by number 3 in the image here. You can see there's a name column, a 1996 column, a 1987 column, a change column, and a discontinued column. It supports checkbox and radio button controls. The Microsoft tree view control supports checkboxes in the first position only, and it's really used as a selection device. In the DBI control, you have them actually as actual controls that can exist in a column, as you can see in the last column, the discontinued column. There's node subtext. For example, if you take a look at beverages and condiments, they both have 12 products beside them, and it's in blue text. That's a subtext that you can have for the node, and you can control the color and the font and all kinds of things independently from the node color and font and so on. There are node headers. I'm not showing an example of that in this image, but we will see it in a minute when we actually run a form. Tooltips are supported in a very nice way, as we'll see in a minute. And you can also do multiple selections. So I can select multiple nodes at once, which you really can't do with the tree view control, the Microsoft tree view control. It's also considerably faster for loading. I know a lot of folks like myself like to use a lazy load, where you load all the parent nodes, and then you load a dummy node under each parent. So that way you're not loading 50,000 nodes. You're only loading the top level ones. When the user clicks on a node, or the plus sign in front of a node, it fires the expand method. In the expand method, you take a look to see if there's a dummy node. If so, you delete it, and then you add the real children for that parent. That's a common technique that's used in the Microsoft Tree View control. It also works in the DBI control, but it's less needed. One reason is because they also have a virtual mode where it loads all the node items into the array, but doesn't store the text. So what happens when a node is actually being drawn? There's an event that fires, and you provide the text for that node. So the nice thing is it loads much quicker in that case, and it also takes up less memory because it's not storing the text for every node. It only draws the text at the time that the node is being drawn on the screen. So let's go and take a look at this. I've got a couple of sample forms here. So let's run this one, and let's run this one. I'm just going to put them side by side. So this one is the Microsoft Tree View control. This one is the DBI Tree View control. I've got them set up so that they have the similar appearance, sort of a older style 3D appearance. Let's go, and I've got, you can play with these forms. Actually, they're in the samples with this session, and I've got a number of different ways you can load the tree view and a number of different options, but so you can play with that on your own. I'm just going to try with one. So let's just go and fire this up here on the Microsoft one. And that took 1.12 seconds to load 32,000 nodes. So that's actually not too bad. Let's try the DBI control. That would took 0.45 seconds. So that was less than half the amount of time. One other thing that's kind of interesting, let's turn this off. Let's not have it load only 32,767 nodes, which you may be wondering why I picked that number. Well, here's the reason why. The Microsoft control actually has a bug, which I wasn't aware of because I don't think I've ever tried to load 51,768 nodes before. It has a bug, and that is that if you look at the nodes count property, you'll notice here that it's displaying that there are minus 13,768 nodes. I think it's kind of obvious to anybody that what type of data type they're using for that count property. In the DBI control, if we tell it to load all of them, it's still going to load it very quickly, but now actually loaded, still the same number of nodes, but it is displaying the correct value there. So as you can see, the DBI control loads at least twice as fast, and I didn't even turn on virtual mode to show you that one. Let's go and take a look now at a sample form to show you some of the different things we can do with the tree view control. So here is the tree view control. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And we can expand some of these nodes and show you the different items underneath there. So as I showed you in the image earlier, you have an optional header. We can turn that off. It's just a property. So if I go and turn off, sorry, this is the title, not header. If I turn off this display title, you can see that it's just a property that indicates whether that title is displayed or not. Same thing with these headers. I can indicate that I want those headers turned on or off. And we can also do node headers. So a node header means that one of the nodes becomes a header. So typically that would be a parent. So if I turn this one on, you can see, for example, that let me expand one of these other ones as well. So you can see that the parent nodes are now defined as node headers. It's really just a property, the node headers property. When you set it to true, then that node appears drawn a little bit differently. And you have control over the properties for everything. You can control the fonts and the colors and the styles and so on. So for example, let's change the fill type. So here's a gradient style, and we can change our colors. So there we're changing our colors, and a different gradient style and a different one and so on. So you have control. These are just properties that you can set. There are different styles for the control itself. This is the default style. Here's what XP Silver looks like. It really kind of just changes the column headers. Here's XP Blue, here's XP Olive, here's Vista Blue. So it changes sort of the overall appearance of the tree view control itself. We can also change the header style. So this is XP and this is Vista. It's kind of subtle, the differences, and you probably want to have I've got the color set to default. You might want to make they're a little bit hard to read. You might want to set the header colors to black, for example, rather than white as they are now. We can turn on multi-line, which now shows each node as a multiple line node. So in some cases, there may be wraparound. If I make this a little bit smaller, we can see that the text will actually wrap around onto a second row. We can turn on multi-select, which means I can select multiple nodes, either by shift clicking or control clicking. I can select multiple nodes that way. The columns support sorting. So if I click on a column like 1996, for example, now the report, the tree view is sorted by the 1996 sales, and within each parent, it's sorted. So for example, this one actually, this 4,480 might be the biggest single node, but meat and poultry has the biggest maximum number, or the biggest total number. So within it's sorted this way. I can also go in descending order, and so now it's shown all of the items in descending order. Or I can click on change. So now we're showing it highest to lowest or lowest to highest based on the percentage change of the sales amounts there. I can turn on selected border. So now every item has a border around it rather than not having a border around it when it's selected. We can turn on tooltips. This kind of is a cool thing. You can have a different tooltip for each node. So here I've got the parent node. It shows a description. It's showing categories, beverages, for example, and it shows the description of that category. So that's what the tool shows. But for the individual nodes themselves, here it's showing the unit price, the quantity in stock, and the quantity on order. So different tooltip for each type of node. And as I mentioned earlier, you can have, let's turn tooltips off, you can have subtext appearing. So here, for example, for beverages, you can see there are a total of 12 products, and same for condiments, but for confections, there are 13, and dairy products, 10, and so on. So that is the subtext for that. So there's lots of different properties, and one other cool thing about this is that you can actually bring up the properties at runtime. So it's just a method call that you make, and you can display the properties dialog for the tree view at runtime, and then change things about it. Like, for example, we want a border. Let's go to a lower thin border and apply that, and change lines to say solid lines instead of dotted lines, and change the selected border to rounded edge, and so on. So you can change these properties on the fly. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you make this dialog available to your end users, but it might be something that you use yourself as you're developing the tree view. Rather than changing a property, running the form, I don't like it. Closing it, opening, modifying the form, changing a property, running it, I don't like it. You can do this. You just have this come up and start changing things, and decide which way you like it. And then once it's done, the properties will be set, and you just have to, check to see how they're set. You can also do a print. So if I click on print, and we'll just go and output to say tv.pdf. Here is that tree view output as a PDF file. So it's just a built-in method that prints it. In my case, I was using the PDF, the Microsoft PDF printer driver, and so that's why it output to a PDF for me. But you can see that it opened. Now it doesn't open it automatically in the click button, the click method of that button. I have it doing a shell execute on the PDF file, so that way it opens for us. But it wouldn't have done that automatically. All right, so let's take a look at just a little bit of code. We're not going to look at a lot here, but the way that the tree view is loaded, if we take a look at the tree view, if we take a look here at the first draw method, you can put the code in a variety of places. I decided to put it into the first draw method of the tree. You could put it in the init method of the form or whatever. So here we're just doing a SQL statement to go and grab some records from the Northwind database. I'm using fastx tab to make a cross-tab cursor. And then that cursor is going to be used to fill the tree view. So we're just doing a scan statement here. And here's where we add a node. So we say this.add node and specify the text that should be displayed and a bunch of other things. Then if we want to use individual column, so here, this method here specifies that for column 2, so we're saying this.celltext, the index number of the node we just added, comma 2, so this would be column 2. We're going to display the sales value for 1996, and in column 3 we'll display the sales value for 1997, and then in column 4 we'll display the change percentage between those two columns. And we set the node data. Remember I mentioned earlier, node data is where you can put a numeric key. So here we're going to put a numeric key into there. So that way, if I want to find an item by key, I can just call find data to go and find the appropriate node index for a key that I know. One thing that you can do, rather than having to add dummy nodes, this tree view controller, this form, loads nodes using lazy loading, like I mentioned before. So it only loads the top level parent nodes, not the child nodes. With the Microsoft control, you wouldn't get a plus sign appearing unless there was a child node. So that's why you typically add a dummy node, just one dummy node underneath each parent. And then when you expand the node, you delete the dummy and then add the real children. With the DBI control, you don't have to do that. You just say this dot node is parent for that index is true, and that means there's a plus sign there whether there are any children or not. And then in the expand method, that's where we actually go and load all the children. So it gets past the index number for the node that just got expanded, and we just check to see, are there any children for this one? If not, we then excuse me, we then go and load the child nodes for that. Excuse me, a little bit of my throat's getting a little bit dry here. It's very dry and the air is very dry here. All right. Any questions about the tree view control?
Yeah, there's a question. Do you need to register the controls using Reg Server 32?
The answer is yes, you do need to register the controls. I'm going to get to deployment later on. At the very end, I'm going to talk about deployment. And so we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But yes, you do need to because they're ActiveX controls, you have to use Reg Server on them in your installer typically.
And then another question from Michael. I vaguely recall issues years ago with these controls not related to DBI, but in general when Windows 7 came out. I'm guessing no more issues with Windows 10?
I haven't run into any. Not to say that there aren't any, but I haven't run into any.
And then Ahmad's asking, can you have total at parent level?
Yes, I think so. Let me just see that. I think I had turned on. Let's run that again. Yeah, you can see that I've done that here. Right, here's my parent totals. Because I had turned on node headers, the node header displayed differently. So and let's sort it again. So here you can see, for example, that beverages is $53,000 total, but each individual node, here is the amount for each individual node.
That's it for now.
Okay. All right, CTX list bar. This is similar to the themed Outlook nav bar control in the VFPX theme controls project. There's a little screenshot down here at the bottom that shows an example of that, typically looking like an Outlook type of control. So the list bar consists of lists. In the example I'm showing here, there's actually 5 lists: customers, products, orders, employees, and another one that's shown here as a little pie chart because it's collapsed in the very last row. So 5 different lists. Each list consists of text, images, or other controls. Now, some of the features that are available, it has different styles available. So, you know, here the screenshot is showing the standard, the toolbar, XP, Blue, Olive, and Vista. So different styles make it look different ways. You can also customize it though. When you set a style, just like we did with the tree view control, setting a style simply sets some initial properties. You can then go and change those properties. So if you want to change gradients and colors and things like that, you can easily do that. And then it'll change the colors from what the original style was. It supports both horizontal and vertical orientation. We'll see that in a minute when I run the sample form. Items can be either vertical or in columns if they're not a control. Here I'm showing tree view controls, and so it wouldn't count in that case. But if you have just text or images shown as the items in the list, then they can either be shown vertically or in columns. And tooltips are supported as well. So let's go and take a look at a sample. So here is the sample form, and we can change the style. This is control style 1, and this is style 2, style 3, 4, and 5. So these are the different types of styles. Now, you'll notice we're not showing anything in this list. And I said that the list consists of controls. That's true, except there's one little gotcha with the CTX list bar control, and that is that controls that are in the list are not displayed unless they're inside a CTX frame. And I didn't find that anywhere in the documentation, but I discovered it sort of the hard way. You can't see it, but there actually is a VFP option group shown here in the list, but you can't see it. So let's instead show that control inside a CTX frame, and now you can see it. And this is just a regular old Fox Pro option group. Now I thought, well, okay, maybe it's just a VFP control thing that's not showing a VFP control inside of an ActiveX, because you know ActiveX controls are their own windows, and so there's issues in drawing VFP controls. You can't have a VFP control shown on top of an ActiveX control. So that maybe it's a VFP control issue. That's why I have to put into a CTX frame. So let's see what a DBI tree view looks like. Well, guess what? We don't see that either. I had to put the tree view inside a CTX frame control. And we'll talk about CTX frame next. So I had to put the tree view control inside a CTX frame, and now it shows up the way you'd expect. And so this is just a regular old tree view control. Not a regular old, this is a DBI tree view control shown inside the list. So that's this control here. This one also has a tree view control. This one has text items. Let me make this window a little bit bigger here so I don't have to scroll necessarily. So this has text items, and you notice that if you click on them, an event fires. So you have control over the font and you know, style and so on, and you get events that fire when you click on them. This is with images now, so it's not just straight text. These are different images which can have, you know, text or no text. So we have a bunch of things we can change here. For example, this is a vertical orientation. Let's go back to customers. So here now the list bar is shown with a vertical orientation. Back to horizontal. We can change the bar fill type. So these are the bars down here. When I change to a particular control style, you notice that it automatically changes the bar fill type and the starting and ending colors for a gradient. But if I go to, I can change that. So example, here as I scroll through the different choices, you can see the changes in the gradients. And of course, we can change the colors as well if we want to change to a different kind of a blue, and so on. And similar to with the tree view control, you can bring up properties, and which is true for almost all of them. You can bring up properties again at runtime and change things about it, such as, you know, if I wanted to change it to a horizontal and apply it, or back to a vertical. So you can make all kinds of changes here in the in this properties dialog at runtime. All right, I'm not going to go into too much code there. We'll just take a quick peek at that. The way that you display a container inside the list is, you notice here's that Fox Pro option group, and here's a tree view control, and here's another tree view control, and here's the Fox Pro option group that's not inside of a CTX frame. Here's the one that is inside of the CTX frame, and so on. So these things are sort of, I just threw them all over at sort of random places there. The way that you host a control inside the list is typically in the list resize event of the list bar. You move the control to the top and left position of the list bar itself. So programmatically, I spread them out so that way it's easy to see at design time. At runtime, these are all going to get moved up into the upper left-hand corner of the list bar control. And that means that they will be drawn, whatever is shown in this first window here, these controls will show through, except as I noted, you have to put them inside of a CTX frame for that really to work. So that's all that this list resize event does, is simply moves all of those controls that are in here up into the upper left-hand corner. Then the other thing you need to do, of course, is that you don't want to show, I don't want to show all 5 of these controls at the same time. I want only to show the control based on which one of these things you said here you wanted to see, the option group or the option group inside of a CTX frame, or the tree view and so on, plus which list you chose. For the customers list, I want to see one tree view. For the employees list, I want to see a different tree, or products list, I want to see a different tree view. And for employees, I want to see a different set of controls, text items and so on. And so in list change, that fires whenever the user picks a particular bar. Here, we're just going to set the visible property of all of those controls appropriately. So if we are on the first list and we're supposed to see the VFP option group, then that visible will be true, the rest will all be false, and so on. So just different settings of true and false for the visible property of those things. And when the item is clicked, it just displays a message box. So again, not a lot of code in there. The list is actually defined in the init method of the form. And here we're just going to load images directly into the list bar. Again, it's a built-in image list, so you don't have to have a separate control. So we're just going to load the images into the list bar. set some properties like the font and so on. And then we're going to create some lists. So there's a list called products. There's a list called orders. There's a list called employees. And in some cases, we're adding image items to them. In some cases, we're adding text items to them. So again, not a lot of code in there to load that up. Any questions about CTX list bar?
None at this time.
Okay. As I mentioned, we can use add image, which adds an image to the list. We can adds an image to the image list part of the list. We call add list to go and add list items to the list. Then we call add item, add image item, or add picture item to add different kinds of items to the list. Or we can host the controls using a CTX frame. All right, so CTX frame is similar to a VFPX themed container. Again, part of that theme controls VFPX project, a theme container. So it's basically the same thing as a VFP container, except it has a built-in gradients and different styles of borders. It can even display drag bars. So if we go back and run this again, there's actually a CTX frame that I'm showing down here. So if we set the fill type to different styles, let me set some colors that make it a little bit more obvious. Let's go to, say, pick a lighter blue like this one. So using different kinds of fill types, it just uses different kinds of gradients as the background for that container. And we can also go and see properties. So for example, we can turn on, we have an outer border already shown. We can maybe make it 3 pixels wide. We can have an inner border. So let's do, say, an inset inner border. Now there's an inner border shown there. Then there's a border style and drag bars. We can turn on drag bars to a single or to, say, dots. So you can make it, let's turn off that inner border to make it a little bit, to make it a little bit more obvious. There, you can see that it can have a drag bar, for example, and so on. So you can change all these properties, again, programmatically, visually at runtime if you want to, by bringing up that properties dialog. So a very simple container. You can, here I've got a, VFP label and a spinner and a couple of controls we'll talk about later on, and a VFP command button and so on. So it's just like a regular old FoxPro container. It's just that it has gradients and more control over borders and things like that. So any questions about CTX frames?
None at this time.
Okay. CTX drop menu. If you were at my Southwest Fox presentation last year, I talked about creating object-oriented menus, because a problem I've had with VFP menus for years is that they're procedural. You have to use the menu designer, it generates some code, and you can't change that code. So it's procedural code, plus they also look outdated. As you can see by the screenshot down here, this is a VFP shortcut menu, whereas this is a shortcut menu I pulled out of I did a screenshot from Outlook. And you can see that these look like old dated menus. These are the more modern style menus. Now there is a VFPX project called Pop Menu that does use what's called owner-drawn menus. And so it does give you the ability to create this style of menu. The problem is that there's no documentation for it whatsoever. And all the comments are in Chinese because the author is Chinese. And so it's very difficult to figure out what you actually need to do. There are some samples that you can look at, but it's very difficult to figure out how do you actually use the control. On the other hand, DBI has a control called CTX drop menu that provides a modern looking shortcut menu and has full documentation as a CHM file. So it's a breeze to work with. You can customize just about everything about that menu. I mean, it can draw a menu that looks like this, or you can have different colors and different gradients, and you have full control over what that menu looks like. So let's go and take a peek. So here's a form here. I've actually got 2 drop menus on it. One is at the form level. So when I right click on the form, I get one menu. The other is in the text box. When I right click, I get a different menu. And they have different appearances just for grins, not for any particular reason. In a real application, you'd obviously want to show them as being very similar. But I wanted to show that you can have differences between the 2 menus here. So we can change a few things about this. For example, we can have this say a center menu instead. So now it's coming out centered rather than left or right on the control. Limit select, this controls, you'll notice that, for example, the selection bar is covering the entire width of the shortcut menu. If I turn that property off, now oops, that's the wrong one. I think it's for this menu here. Yeah. You can change the margin fill type. So margin is the thing over at the left. That's this thing here that contains the icons. We can change our margin fill type. We choose different kinds of gradients, for example, different colors. You can have different line colors. Select fill type controls. Right now you can see it's a single box with a single border around it. I can change what that looks like. So here now we've got a different kind of gradient, and again we can change the colors for that. And again, you can change the line color. It has a blue line surrounding it, but we can make it, say, a red line. We can change the menu fill type. So this is not the same as the selection. This is the actual menu itself. So we can change that, for example, and make that a different color. So you can really make a truly ugly menu, very easily by playing with these different colors. And as we've seen before, we have a properties dialog, so you can go and change properties about this menu, about how it works. Let's go and take a look at the code for this. So in the init method of the form, in the init method of the form, I'm defining a couple different menus. One of them is an O menu. You can see there's two menu objects dropped on the form here. They're invisible at runtime, obviously. So I'm gonna fill these things in programmatically. I could do it visually as well. If I right-click and choose properties here at design time, I can go and load the images programmatically. I can set all my properties programmatically. But I kind of like to do things in code sometimes, just so that it's more obvious what the things are. So here we're going to load images, the cut, copy, and paste image for the shortcut menu for the text box. We'll set up some properties such as what the background color should be and the margin colors and the selection colors and so on. And then we'll add some items to it. So it's just calling the add item method of the menu and specifying what the text should be, the cut, copy, paste, and so on. Here's a separator bar. Here's a separator bar. Cut, copy, paste, and clear. And then here's a separator bar, and then select all. Then the one for the form, again, load some images, set some properties of it, such as the colors and so on. And then we're going to load some, add some items. So new, open, save, have a separator bar, a disabled bar. Let's actually run this again. I didn't show you that you have submenus. So if I right click here and choose format, you can see that you have a submenu as well. And you can see there's a disabled bar here. And here's one that is checked or unchecked, depending on whether I choose it or not. And again, so that's all loaded in through here. So here, for example, we're defining the format parent menu, and then I've got the code indented. Obviously you don't have to do that. I'm just doing it as a sort of a visual way to myself to indicate that these are going to be submenu items underneath that format menu. And this is a checked item, and so I just set the item check property to true to force that to be checked. So, any questions about CTX drop menu for doing shortcut menus?
No, you answered Alex's question just after he asked it with flyout menus.
Okay, and that was the only one?
That's it.
Okay. All right, so that's great for shortcut menus. What about the Fox Pro menu bar, like the system menu bar? The top level menu bar. We want those to look more modern as well. And so there is a control for that. The ctxToolBar. Now that wouldn't necessarily be my first choice when I was looking at menus. Wouldn't it be called CTX menu? And the reason it's called ctxToolBar is because it provides both menus and toolbars. And at first I was wondering, well, toolbars and menu bars really aren't the same thing, but actually they kind of are. Really, the only difference between a menu, like a top level menu, and a toolbar is whether there are images shown on what we call pads in VFP. And if you look at the screen snapshot here, really what's the difference between this toolbar, other than it appears a little bit lower and it has this drag bar on it, which you can turn off. It has images on the buttons, but on the pads. Other than that, there really is no difference, because as you can see, you can have submenu items under your toolbars. So like I said, really the only difference between a menu and a toolbar is just whether there are any images in it or not, and a few other cosmetic differences. Interestingly, ctxToolBar supports drag and drop at runtime. So you could think about this. Think about creating a UI for your users where they want to customize the toolbars themselves. And rather than having some fancy dialogue where you can control what happens, you just allow them to drag and drop. You know, maybe you've got something on the form here, like a picture of an invoice. They just drag the invoice and drop it onto the toolbar, and it then adds that new menu item or that new function to the toolbar. So your users could theoretically, if you gave them this ability, could customize their own toolbars at runtime. All right, so let's go and take a look at that. So let's run our toolbar demo. So this is what I took the screen snapshot from. So you can see there's both a menu at the top, and you notice this is a modern looking menu. This doesn't look like the VFP menus. So we have that margin over at the left. We have nice gradient colors and things like that. So that's our menu bar. And then here's a toolbar. And one of the nice things about toolbars is it has separators, just like a menu can have separator bars. You can have separators in the toolbar, and you can have drop downs. So it looks like this what some people call a split button. So you can have, you know, if I want to be able to create a new what? Well, new customer, employee, order, or product. So you can do these, what you might call a split bar, very easily. It's just it's done exactly the same way that this would be done. It's just a sub menu under a menu. Now we have different styles. So this is the default style. Let's go XP blue. So that's what it looks like there. XP olive and Vista blue. So you can control what that menu looks like. We can change the menu fill type. So the margin fill type. So right now it's 0, going from sort of a gray to another gray, but we could change that and maybe have some kind of different colors here. And again, we can make our menus look ugly as we want them to look. And we can change our selection fill types and our back fill types and our menu fill types, similar to what we saw with the shortcut menus. So you can change all the colors, the font, everything about the menus yourself. Same thing with the toolbar. This is the default style. This is XP blue, XP olive, and Vista blue. So, there's also properties you can change, whether, for example, you have drag bars. Setting Vista blue automatically turns off drag bars, but you can turn it back on again. It's just a property setting. There are some other things you can control. For example, you can set a minimum border. So the way and limit select. So the way that these things work is, actually I have to go to olive. Here we go. So with minimum border turned on, you'll notice that, or turned off, you'll notice that the toolbar takes the entire width of the form. But if I turn it on, then it only shows as wide as the very last control. So only as wide as necessary. Same thing for the menu. Again, if we go olive here and I set menu minimum border on or off, it just depends on whether the menu is drawn full width or just partial width. And we also have a limit select. It really doesn't pay much, or doesn't sort of come much into play with toolbars, but it does with menus. So you'll notice that the selection bar covers the entire width of the menu. But if I turn off limit select, now it only covers up to the margin. And there's other properties as well, of course. And you can control what happens when you fire it. So you can bring up the properties dialog at runtime and change things there if you want to. So this gives you full control over menus. And when you choose an item here, it's going to fire off a method and you can execute it. So let's go and take a look at the code for that. So in the init method of the form, I'm setting up the menus. Now, setting up the two things. So the menu, just for grins, I decided to set up at design time. So I right-click it and choose properties, and then I set all the properties I wanted. And there's actually a built-in menu builder. So you can add items, remove items, delete items. You can move items around. You can set everything up visually using this menu builder that's built into this properties dialog. So for the menu, I set up almost all the properties using the properties dialog. Now there are a few properties that you can't change. I guess they're just missing from the properties dialog. So mask color and the font and a few other things. So I changed a few things to give it an Office or Windows Microsoft Office-like appearance for the menu bar, by changing a few things programmatically. The toolbar, though, I did entirely. You notice the toolbar is empty. The menu bar shows File, Edit, Menu, and Toolbar, but the toolbar is empty. That's because I didn't set it up visually. I set it up programmatically. So all of these lines of code, adding images, just like we saw before with the add image method, and then add item, just like we saw before. to add items either to the menu or to the toolbar. In this case, it's the same control, just visually looks a little bit differently. So adding items, and again, we can have a split bar just by when we add the item, we specify 2 as the numeric value here, meaning this is going to be have a sub menu, and in that case, it means it appears as a split button. And so again, I indented the code just so I can visually see these are the items that appear underneath the new button. And so on, adding the save and filter and find and all the other different buttons in the toolbar there. And then I changed a couple of things just to make these controls down here, just to make them look a little bit nice. When an item is chosen in the menu, item click fires and you get an index number. And so I'm just, if you chose exit, I actually close the form. If you choose limit select for the menu, I actually change the limit select. So that's how that worked. When I chose the item from the menu, it automatically changed the property of the menu. That's because this code is doing that. In all other cases, I just displayed a message box. And the same thing for here. When you choose an item here, it's just displaying a message box. Typically, you'd have a case statement. Do case TN item equals 1. That means they click the first button. Case TN item equals 2. They click the second button, and so on. So as I mentioned, you can either use the menu builder or use code to set it up. And the code is essentially identical to CTX drop menu because it's, you're going to have add image to add images. You're going to have add item to add items to the menu. So any questions about CtxToolBar?
Yeah, apparently the audience has got their coffee and they're ready to go with this one. So Scott asked, do you have to add the ActiveX controls to a form, or can you use create object and set it up in a generic PRG to work with the controls?
I haven't tried it, but I'm pretty sure that you can do it because it's just you instantiate that control programmatically at runtime. The only issue you're going to run into is licensing, same as you do with the Microsoft controls. You can do the same thing with the Microsoft Tree View. You can create it programmatically at runtime and add it to a form. The issue you run into there is that when a form has a Tree View control on it visually, then the license gets added to the Windows registry the first time that thing is drawn. And so you don't have any licensing issues. It's goofy because the Microsoft Tree View control is free, but if you programmatically add a Tree View control to a form at runtime, your end user is going to get a not licensed for this, no license for this control or something like that error message, unless you programmatically, say as part of your installer, add a license registry key to the Windows registry. That's with the Microsoft control. So I assume that the DBI controls are similar. You would have to programmatically create a license key in the Windows registry, and I'm not sure that DBI allows that. So you'd have to check with them. I think it's probably physically possible to do it and certainly would work on your machine, but when you deploy your customers, they may have licensing issues. So check with DBI about that, and they could tell you that.
Okay. Have you tried using the toolbar control on touchscreen devices?
I have not, because I don't have a touchscreen device.
Okay. Can you put other objects besides buttons onto the toolbar? And in a related question, can you put text on the blank part of a toolbar to the right of the last control?
I believe the answer to both of those is no. When you add items to the toolbar, you can control how they look. You can change the fonts and colors, whether they have an image or not, whether they have text or not. It could be image only buttons, it could be text only buttons, but I'm pretty sure, I can't think of any way that you could add, say, like a Fox Pro checkbox or a combo box or things like that. I'm 99% positive the answer to that is no, because I haven't come across any method to do that. It's really just add item is the method you call to add an item to the toolbar. And same thing with the text. You can add items to the toolbar, but I can't see that you could add it beside it. Now, one thing you could do, though, is you could have your toolbar. Let's go back to Olive for the toolbar. It sort of looks like this is a toolbar here, so maybe you could add some stuff over here, but certainly not within here.
Okay, Kevin asks, if a user customizes the toolbar at runtime, can the control save the settings that load in the save settings for the next run?
Yes, that's a very cool feature. I didn't mention that, so thanks for asking. Yes, there's actually a method of these controls that saves the properties, and I think the choices are you can save to XML, or maybe that's the only choice. I can't. It's been a while since I looked at it, but yes. Now you're responsible for repopulating it though, so it's not just going to automatically happen. So you could, for example, when the user closes the properties control, you could then call the method that saves those properties to XML and then squirrel that away somewhere, like in an INI file or a memo field of a Foxpro table. Then you're responsible on the init of that form to read those settings back in and then just apply them to the control. So yes, you could have your users change things visually and have them restored the next time they use it. I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced that I want the users to see this dialogue unless they're a pretty advanced user.
Alex asking about font size.
Oh yeah, all the fonts are controlled with properties. Let's go back to this form again. And I actually changed that in the init of the form. I like to use Seago UI. And so here I said font.name equals Seago UI. I could also say font.size equals 12 or whatever.
Okay, Ahmad's asking, can we use a toolbar as a global toolbar? And a related question, can I have a master, quote unquote, master toolbar in the underscore screen without an active form?
I don't know that you could do that because, again, I think that would require adding the control programmatically rather than visually. Because you sort of can't drag and drop an ActiveX control and drop it on underscore screen. Well, I guess you could with the, maybe, I don't know. I would guess not. I would think that you probably would want to use, rather than underscore screen, use your own top level form and use that in place of underscore screen. And then for sure, then you can have your master toolbar and master menu for the entire application living in that top level form. So the answer is I'm not sure.
Okay. Oh man, they're scrolling off faster than I can read them. Hold on. When adding the images, how do you associate an image with a particular menu pad? It looks like you just add them all sequentially.
It's done by index. So you notice I put comments here to myself. This is image number 1, image number 2, image number 3, because I was kind of getting lost when I was down here adding items. I was kind of getting lost as to which image was which item. It would be nice if with the built-in image list control, with the Microsoft image list control, you can assign a key value. So it might be image number 1, but you can give it a key value of open, new, save. And then in the tree view control, when you specify the image for a node, you can use the key of the image. So you can say open, new, save. With the DBI controls, you don't do that. These are numeric values. The image number is a numeric value. So that's why I added these comments to myself. This is image number 1, image number 2. And so when I added the open item, I specified image number 1, image number 2, image number 8, image number 9, and so on. So unfortunately, you can't do it by a key. You have to do it by an index number.
Okay, Tom Green made a suggestion, add your DBI controls into a VCX OLE as a class, and then you could instantiate those to create object.
You actually definitely can do that. I hadn't thought about doing that to avoid the licensing issue. I've actually already done it. I don't actually have it in here. I think I removed it from the project, but I actually do have that in TreeView, SF TreeView. Yeah, so this SF TreeView is, this SF TreeView container contains, this is a DBI ActiveX control inside of a FoxPro container. So yes, you definitely can do that. I'm not sure that that will get around the licensing problem, but maybe it would.
Okay, just a few more. What about the DBI scheduler? Can it show a time slot with appointments for 2 or more people at the same time slot?
We're not talking about the schedule right now. We'll get to that a little bit later on.
Okay. What happens if you resize a form with the toolbar, automatic resize?
Oh, yeah, actually, that actually works pretty much the same way as any VFP control. So you'll notice that I set anchor to 10 for both of these. If I hadn't done that, then when I resize the form, the toolbar wouldn't have resized, and neither would the menu bar. So just use the same anchor property that we're used to using in FoxPro.
Okay, I think you better keep going, or we're going to keep you
Yeah,
on this
yeah,
topic.
you're right. Okay, so carry on. And don't forget, I do have a Q&A session later on, so we can talk about more things later on. All right, CTX drop date. It's a date picker control that is much better than Microsoft's control. First of all, it can have a more modern appearance. You can make it look old and tired if you really want to. That would be the old and tired checkbox. Just turn that on, and then you have the old and tired look. But most people are going to want to have the more modern look, and so you can make it look pretty much like you see in the screenshot here. It has an optional spinner, so you can show a little spinner control, so you can move up and down a date just by clicking on the spinner. You can customize just about everything. You can change the colors and the fonts and the sizes, and you can change the names of the months and the letters that are used for the days, and whether there are how dates are shown and so on. It supports both numerical and text formats for dates. So by numerical, I mean 02/11/2020, or you can have it displayed as January 1st, 2020, for example. And it even supports intelligent data entry. So let's go and take a look at this drop date control. This is the Microsoft control, and you notice it looks kind of old and dated. And you can only change one thing at a time. You can go ahead a month at a time. If you click on month, you can change to a month. If you click on year, you can change up and down a year. But if I want to go up or down 50 years, from somebody's birth date, I gotta either I gotta hit a lot of up buttons. Whereas with the DBI control, which you'll notice right now is looking very much like the Microsoft control. That's only because that's the default style. Let's change to XP Blue or XP Olive or Vista Blue. So again, we can have a modern looking control. It has a spinner, so I can go up and down one day at a time. I can drop down my control, and now we have the more modern calendar part. So if I click on this, it displays the months in the year. If I click on the year, it displays individual years in a decade. If I click on this again, now it shows individual decades. And so it's very easy to change. And of course, I can scroll any of those things forward or backward. And there's actually other properties as well. For example, I've got it set right now to display the month in a numeric format. And you can control what that format is. It's month, day, year, but you can change it to day, month, year, or year, month, day. But you can also change it to a long or short format. So here's what the long format looks like, and here's what the short format looks like. And the interesting thing is your users can do data entry in that format. So if, for example, if I go here and change this and type Jan 2, it automatically puts in January 2nd. And you have other things that you can change as well. For example, you can change the spinner width and the drop width and the initial delay when they click on the drop button, and the border type and the calendar settings. You can change what the day headers are, those individual letter abbreviations, and you can change what the months are and the day names. And I mean, you can change literally everything about this control. It's completely customizable. Now, there's just one little glitch, not even a glitch, but just couple little gotchas with this. One is that there's no data binding, so you can't, set the control source property. So instead, what you need to do is in the refresh method or refresh event, I guess, of the control, that's where you'd set the value to whatever your default date should be, such as, a birthday or a date value in a table. And in the change event, which fires when the user change a different date, that's where you'd grab it and put it somewhere. The other gotcha is that the value is not a date. This is sort of the one thing that I wish they had done similar to the Microsoft control, and that that'd be a date. Instead, it's the number of days since a base date. So you actually need to convert it. Obviously you're going to want a VFP date. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the control value, add the base date, which is January 1st of 1900, and then subtract a date offset. The reason why they have this date offset is because different languages have different date offsets, like VB and Access, for example, use a different date offset than FoxPro does. So if you just ask for the control.date offset, it'll know which one it's using. And so you have to use something like this to convert from the control value to a VFP date, and you do something similar where you subtract the date offset or add the date offset and subtract the 1900 January 1st 1900 to go from a VFP date to the control value. So any questions about that drop date? No questions? Okay. CTX combo. This is like the VFP combo box on steroids. And when I say steroids, I mean the good kind, not the bad kind. So you can customize just about everything about the combo box. I mean, you can control the colors and the borders and the style of drop down arrow and all kinds of things. You can have header items. We'll see that in a second when I run it. You can have columns. So here's a two column combo box. You can have alternating colors, so you can see that here in the combo box as well. You can have images that appear. You can have auto completion. So when I start typing, it automatically fills in. We've all written code that does that. It's built into the DBI control. It also has auto save and MRU, which I'll show you in a second what I mean by those. So let's go and run this combo box form. And first of all, here's a drop down that has headers. So you'll notice that I cannot select the country. The only items that I can select are the individual cities within a country. That's because these country items are defined as headers. And I'll show you the code for that in a little bit. But these are defined as headers, and so they're not selectable. They just provide a header for the different cities. And again, we can change properties. So this is set to, a drop-down list versus a drop-down combo. So, whichever you want. You can change what the arrows look like and what the fill type is and what the button style is. For example, here's a regular button as opposed to the modern button. And here's a button style. We can go back to modern. We can change the select border to a rounded edge or regular or raised. And so you can change all of those different things. Here's a drop-down list with multiple columns, pictures, and alternating colors. And again, those are just properties. You don't have to do any work other than saying, in the case of properties, you just go and say that I want, where's the property for alternate colors, for example. And you can specify what those colors are. I'm using the default colors, but you can pick your own your own set of colors for what those alternating are. And you can have multiple columns. In this case, we've got one column called country and one column called code, and different alignment. The country is left aligned, the code is centered. So you have all kinds of control over these different properties. Now, this one's kind of cool. So in this one, now you notice I'm using the old style appearance. I'm not using the modern style like we do these other ones. Just to show you that you can do that. So this list shows the organizers of Virtual Fox Fest. Now watch what happens when I choose Rick. Well, obviously he becomes selected, but he also moves to the top of the list. When I choose myself, I move to the top of the list. In other words, we have essentially an MRU, most recently used, automatically floats to the top of the list. Again, it's a property. If you don't want that behavior, you turn the property off. You want it, you turn it on. So that's a really nice feature, because if your users are typically choosing the same value over and over again, it'll remember that value. Now, obviously, between instances of the form, you'd be responsible for saving the most recent value and then restoring it when you open the form. So it doesn't remember it between runs, but but it does within that particular form. It can also do auto save. So, for example, let's add Rick Borup to the list here. Oops, I didn't press enter. Sorry, try that. There. So now Rick Borup was automatically added to the list. And again, we've all done that. We've all written code that does that kind of auto adding, but it's built into the DBI control. Again, optional. You can turn that on or off. It also does auto completion. So if I type RICK space, it pops up a list of all the Ricks. Now, why did I have to type in 5? Well, that's just a property. I could change it, for example, and make it only 2 letters. So that's just a property I can change. And now when I type in 2 letters, I get drop down. So again, pretty much everything about these controls is customizable. Now, again, similar to the drop date, there is no data binding. So you can't say, control source equals whatever. So again, in the refresh method, you'll fill in the current value. In the change method, you'll grab the value and store it somewhere or do something with it. Any questions about CTX combo?
None about the combo, but I was unable to click the microphone button to ask you the question. Is there a / event to react on key presses for the calendar, like, plus and minus for dates, T for today, those kinds of things?
Yes. Yeah, there is.
Okay, that's it.
No questions for combo?
Nope.
Okay. All right, CTX tips. By a show of hands, how many here use the CTL32 balloon tip? Anybody? I don't see any hands up, so I guess nobody's using it. Okay, so I'm maybe the only one who's using CTL32 balloon tip, but it's actually a really, really cool control. It's from Carlos Alouati. And unfortunately, his website is no longer. So I'm not sure where you can download this from. But anyway, I use this a lot to display a much bigger window where you can have all kinds of different things shown than just a regular old VFP tooltip. So this is typically used for things like extended tips where you have more information than just, 256 characters, or you want some kind of pop-up help or status or in things like that. The CTX tips control has different window types. So let's go and take a look at that control. So this has a tooltip, and you can see that a tooltip has several different areas. It has a title. In this case, I have an image and text, and the text is showing in a certain font and certain color. It has a body, and the body can have an image and text, and you have control over the fonts and styles and so on. And it also has a footer. And these are all optional. So you can have one with no header, no footer, no body, whatever you want. Each section has its own text and its own image and independent formatting. So the button has that. This one is similar, but it just doesn't have an image in the body. And you can make them look different. Here's a regular border. So now this one kind of looks like a VFP tooltip, sort of. Here's a thought bubble. Here's a drop shadow box. So there's a drop shadow in behind that box. Here's a circular bubble. Not really the greatest because, as you can see, the text overflows the bubble. It would be nice if it flowed within the bubble, but it doesn't, so it kind of looks weird. And then Vista Tips. And there's also a Vista Tips 2, which just has a slightly different appearance. Here's Vista Style. So now it's a little bit different appearance. And you can change the fill type. So we can go with different kinds of gradients. And we can go with different colors. So like the other controls we've seen, you have full control over pretty much everything about the tooltip. And again, you can bring up properties at runtime and change all kinds of stuff about that. So let's go and take a quick peek at that. One kind of weird thing about how tooltips work, though, is that there is a tooltip control, and then you tell it as you move over. The tooltips don't fire automatically like they do in VFP. Typically in the mouse enter and mouse leave, you're going to have to code something, and we'll take a look at that in a second. But let's first of all look at how we set up the tooltip. So in the init method, I add some images, same as we've seen a bunch of different times, set some fonts and some styles and all kinds of different properties. And then I'm going to add two tooltips. Both of them are what are called the enhanced tips. They're not just a regular old tip. They're going to have a header and a body and a footer. And so you specify what the header text is, the image in the header text, what the body is and the image for it, what the footer is, and so on. And then I'm going to define a second tooltip. This one doesn't have an image in the body. So now that I've got two different tooltips, in the mouse move method for or actually I guess I could do mouse enter, but in the mouse move method for this command button, I set the item over ID to 1. So show the first tooltip when I'm over this control, and show the second tooltip when I'm over this control. And when I'm over the form, set it to 0, so that basically clears any tooltips that are currently being displayed. So, like I said, I'm currently using the CTL32 balloon tip, but I'm going to switch to using the DBI tips. And I use it typically for status, not necessarily for help, but for status. As you hover over something, you want to show, say, the quantity on hand and the number of items sold, and maybe the last 5 items that were, last time 5 times it was sold in last 5 invoices, for example, in a little thing that they can hover over, so it doesn't take up any screen real estate when they're not hovering over it. Any questions about CTX tips?
Just one. Can I have?
Sorry, I didn't hear all that. Can I have
tooltips with rounded edges?
Yes, I showed that. I showed that circular. Oh, sorry, you mean like rounded edges in the square? It's kind of hard to see, but they are actually rounded now. I'm not sure if you can control the curvature. We can just take a quick peek there and see if there is a curvature property. I know that in some of them there is. I'm not seeing it sort of at first glance, but like I said before, not all. Oh, yeah, there it is right there, rounded corners. Let's try that. So it's slightly rounded. And like I said, I guess you could check the help and see if there's a curvature property, or I could check it when we go into the Q&A session. Any other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay. All right, CTX Group provides a container with a label border. I don't know if any of you have done that, but I've done it lots of times where you have a container with a border and a label on top of it, like toolbar shown here in the screenshot. So it's a very simple control. It's a container, so you can add controls to it, and it has a border which you can set the properties of, and it has a caption which you can optionally turn off, but then you wouldn't bother using this control if you didn't want to have a caption. And you could change the back color and font and so on. So we'll just take a quick peek at that. So here is that container. Here's that CTX group. So I'm using it for this control and for this control here, just so you can have a label on there. And if we modify that form, you can see that I did set some properties of it programmatically. So we set the caption to menu, set the border type to 5, which is rounded, set the back color of the font, and so on. But we can also do that programmatically, visually as well, using the property control. So we can set the alignment. For example, we can have it at the right or in the center where that caption goes. We can change our border type. We can have it up here at the bottom instead of at the top, and so on. And you have control over the colors and fonts and so on. But again, it's a FoxPro container, it's a container, so you can add controls to it and then move it around or do whatever with it. So a very simple control, but it's a nice little thing to use. Any questions about CT Group?
None.
Okay. 2 more controls to look at. So CT Color Button and CT Color Combo provide color pickers. As I've been showing you kind of all along here, wherever I had a color picker where I'm changing colors, those weren't actually FoxPro controls. Those were either CT Color Button or CT Color Combo. They can display either standard or custom colors. So standard colors would be the ones that are shown here, but there is another button where you can open it up and choose more colors. Or you can pick your own custom colors. Like, if you've got, say, a company that has 3 or 4 colors in their standard logo, things like that, you could have those 3 colors as the one that are shown. You have full control over the appearance. Again, is it raised or embossed, or is it, what colors are used, and so on. The CT Color Combo can also display different widths. So let's go and take a look at this example. Well, let's go back to this one for a second. So as I mentioned before, these are those CT color buttons. So you can control, these are just set to standard. So they're showing a standard set of colors, which you can expand or even define custom colors. So typical color chooser dialogues. But that's all they are. The nice thing is that they show, and I've created these buttons myself in VFP, and they're just kind of, more work to do, but they'll show the currently chosen color, and they have a little drop down button where the user can pick a different color. So nice little control, but here's a slightly different use of it. So here I've got a VFP shape, and this color combo chooses the color. And again, it's showing the same colors. It's just, I just have a different style property set. So it shows as this combo box rather than the other one. So here we can change the color. This one is a little bit different though. This one is these are both CT color combos, but this one is displaying line widths instead. So I'm changing both the color and the width, and that was pretty easily done just by in the init method for this thing. I'm just basically going for I equals 1 to 10, add an item, black, and set the height to I. So the height changes for each one. And in the change event that fires, I simply set the border width of the VFP shape to whatever item number they chose. So very simple to do those kinds of things. Any questions about those color pickers?
Just a general question. Can you use these controls in an HTML page?
You can use ActiveX controls in HTML page, but that's really discouraged these days. I think ActiveX controls are almost always disabled by default in your browser. The user would have to specifically turn that on. I'm not going to take any more questions because I'm getting really close to out of time, and I've got a couple more things to discuss. So there are lots of other controls. As I said, there are 88 different controls, 63 of which are unique. This, for example, is a ctx calendar control where this can be used for things like scheduling. Here you can see a calendar over at the left, and over at the right you can have different time slots and different what they call resources. So here's room 242 and room 381 and room 417, time slot set every 15 minutes. That's all customizable, all programmable. There's a CTX list view, which is like the Microsoft list view, but better. a ctx gauge, which is like a gauge control, so like a speedometer on your car, although it has different ways it can appear. ctx slide is like a slider, like the Microsoft slider, so you can use to set a numeric value. ctx split is a splitter control, so it can be used to control the relative sizes of controls that are beside each other or above and below each other. ctx date, ctx calendar, and ctx year are sort of different variations of these different controls. So licensing and deployment. The DBI controls are licensed per developer using the controls in a design surface. So if you have two developers who need to be able to modify a form and that form contains a DBI control, then you need two licenses. However, the runtime components are all royalty free. So if you're a sole developer or you're the only one maintaining those forms, you just need one license and you deploy it to your customers completely royalty free. Pricing is shown here, but of course prices are subject to change. They have single dev, 5 dev, and site license pricing, and the maintenance pricing as well. But again, check their website for the most current pricing. For deployment, you must register and deploy and register the OCXs. But unlike the Microsoft controls, each control that we saw is in its own OCX, and the name of the OCX is the same as the name of the control. So ctx TreeView is in ctxTreeView.ocx. So none of that mscom.ct2.ocx. Is that the name of the control? And they're easy to find. They're all in the install folder, so easy to do. And registering, you just register them as part of your installing process, like you would any other ActiveX control. You also need to deploy at least 2 other DLLs, MFC 110U.dll, and that one must be registered. So you'll, again, in your installer, you'll register that control, and this other DLL as well. This last DLL is only used if you're going to display the properties dialog in a runtime environment, and so if you don't do that, which you may or you don't need that DLL. Now, for VFF attendees, DBI has kindly offered a 50% discount on all DBI component software, both COM and .NET, not just the ones that I'm showing today, but also all their .NET controls. But you only have until the end of the month. So if you're interested, go to dbi-tech.com/virtualfoxfest and go through their form there, and you'll get a 50% discount on their control. They also gave me 2 licenses of their 64-bit version, which contains all of the 32-bit controls as well, for giveaway. So let's go and pick our winners. Albert Gostick, so let me write this down, is the winner of the first one, and I will send them your name and email address, and they'll contact you about how to load your license. And the other winner is Sylvain. Okay, so I got both of those winners. All right, so to wind up, DBI Studio Controls for COM allows you to modernize the appearance of your applications, because these controls appear more modern out of the box, and they have the ability to change pretty much every single thing about their appearance to make them look like, for example, Outlook controls. They are very active controls. They have a lot more feature than the VFP native controls or even the Microsoft ActiveX controls that ship with VFP. There is a Q&A session in the sessions area. So once we're done here, just go over to sessions. You'll find that session. I'll be there for a little while to chat with whoever has any additional questions. Thank you very much for attending. Please remember to fill out your evaluation.